Okay, so I assume everyone can see the slides all right. And thank you so much, Wendy, for that introduction. As she mentioned, I'm a master gardener here in SLO County, and I was asked to come and talk a little bit about Waterwise gardening. So my hope is that the slides will advance. Oh, there we go. Okay. So just to give an overview, we're going to talk a little bit about what it is, what is Waterwise gardening, kind of what the benefits are, how that affects microclimates, plant selection, and protecting water quality. So what it is, so obviously it's trying to use water as wisely as possible, which usually means reducing the water that we're using, reducing water waste. We'll talk a little bit about that. We waste a lot of water, as you probably can imagine, even in California, where we're all trying to conserve. It's very common. And we want to use plants that are adapted to our microclimate, because if we use plants that are adapted, then we're going to use less water. So plants that would naturally occur here. And then we want to check for overwatering, because overwatering is a very common practice in most home gardens, and we want to try to avoid that. So clearly the benefits, one of them is, wow, we'll save money, right? We know water is very expensive here in California, and so we're all interested in lowering our water bills. So that's a definite benefit from being water wise, but we'll use less energy in other ways too, like for pumping that water into your gardens. And typically plants are going to be healthier and less maintenance if we water them just the amount of water that they need. And most plants want to kind of dry out a little bit in between waterings. So they'll be a little healthier if we do that. If we're using native plants, a lot of people think Waterwise means, oh, everything's got to be a native plant, and that's not necessarily true. But when we do use native plants, it attracts native pollinators. That kind of makes sense, right? You see a lot of honeybees, and honeybees are on a lot of different plants. But when you look at our native plants, watering needs are. So I think we talked about a couple ways you can do that, looking at wool coal or looking at the native plant side of Calscape if it's native plants, but wool coal has other non-native plants as well. Watering in the morning is a good technique. As many of you probably already know, you'll get less evaporation. Avoiding overwatering, we've talked about that. Most plants prefer infrequent deep watering, although I will say with sandy soils, if you do too deep of watering, it's just going down, right? So you may have to do a little more frequent watering on sandy soils. And then I want to talk a little bit about evapotranspiration. I have a couple slides on that. Evapotranspiration is affected by wind, sun, humidity, temperature, and your soil type as well. And we should be making some seasonal adjustments. So a good way to look at this is transpiration is water that's coming off the leaves of the plants, and evaporation is water that's coming off the soil. So those are the two ways that our garden loses water. And of course, we add water typically with rain or irrigation. These are all the things that affect evapotranspiration, and they call it reference evapotranspiration because there's kind of a set number that's based on lawn. So they use turf grass and say, this is how much evapotranspiration occurs in turf grass. And there's the formula, if anyone is mathematically inclined and wants to figure that out on their own. When we look at reference ET, there's 18 regions in the state of California. So San Luis Obispo is one. There also is a coastal one. This is the one that I had available. It shows you very nicely that the evapotranspiration rate happens, of course, more in the summer, right? That kind of makes sense because it's hotter. But the one thing that is that affects how much water leaves our soil and our plants is how long the days are. So it's really about solar radiation versus, just the heat. Sometimes you'll say, oh, well, it was 110 here, especially in North County. And really it doesn't affect the evapotranspiration rate as much as how long the day is. So the way you look at this chart is you see in June and July, we use the most, or we lose the most water. It's 6 inches on average per month, right? So if we say that's almost 100% of our water loss, then we see that it's about 80% in August, maybe, it's at 75% in September, getting down to 60% in October. By the time we get down to December, it's like 33% of the total reference evapotranspiration. So you're losing a lot less water naturally. But what tends to happen is we tend to leave our sprinklers on all summer long, right? All spring and summer long. So this red is the water that we're using, which calculates to about 35% of the water use for the year. That's really wasted that we probably don't need. Most of us are pretty good. Hey, it's raining. I'm going to turn it off in December and January and February, right? But we have a lot of water loss that we're not taking into account, less water loss from evapotranspiration. So there are smart controllers that you could use. I don't have a smart controller, but this is great. It takes a little while to set it up, then you don't have to think about it all year. And you could set it to say 75% in September, 66% in October, 33% by December. Or you can just go out and change the time on your sprinkler every couple of months to allow for evapotranspiration, to take that into account. So one other thing we want to do is we want to protect the water quality. I see a couple of things in the chat. So, oh yes, you have the pollinator talk. Love bladder pod. Okay, great. I just want to make sure I didn't miss a key question. We want to protect our water quality. And one way that we can do that is to allow the water to permeate into our soil and not run off. So with runoff, as you might know, it collects a lot of pollutants as it's going down our driveway and going down the streets and into the storm sewers that are then going out to the ocean. So we want to allow the water to permeate and then naturally come back to our water table. So you can use decomposed granite or gravel or even flagstones that are butted up to each other and don't have cement in between them. All of these things will kind of prevent runoff from either rainwater or irrigation, right? We want to retain as much of that moisture as we can. And we can also help by mulching our plants too, because the water will then seep in and stay in our root zone of the plant. And if we minimize fertilizers, that will also help our water quality as well, because we tend to also over fertilize our plants, and then that water, those fertilizers go into our water supply as well. So I'm almost perfect on time. I just want to remind people that if you have questions, whether it's about this or just plants in general, or you're having trouble with a pest in your garden, you can call or email us at the SLO Master Gardener help desk. We run a help desk. This is one for SLO, which would be the closest to your area, but we also have one in Arroyo Grande and one in Templeton. And you can, the one email address. So if you want to send us pictures of a problem that you're having, we can research it and get back to you, one of our master gardeners. And we also offer workshops. We've just started them back. We had our first one in September. They're the second Saturday of the month. It's called Advice to Grow By. They're at 10 o'clock over at the Garden of the Seven Sisters, which is in SLO on Johnson and Bishop, kind of around the corner there on Sierra Way. I don't know for sure yet. With things are always kind of iffy with the pandemic now, and we haven't announced October's yet. But if we do have one in October, it'll be on our website, and so I've listed our website there. And then I've also listed a couple references. There's a good reference on sustainable landscaping in California. And then also CMIS, which is the California Irrigation Management Information System. That's where all that information comes from about the evapotranspiration rates. So I'll end it there. And I think I have one more question in the chat. Oh, she also heard that weed cloth doesn't allow water to soak in. So yeah, I guess you would have to test that. There's probably some weed cloths that might not, but I think there are some that do allow for percolation of water through them. Someone else asking, what about liquid that comes from worms as a fertilizer? Does it disturb the water? Oh, what liquid that comes from worms as a fertilizer? You know, there's some debate about using, I think people mostly call it like compost tea, how to use that in the garden. I'm not sure if it would affect the water quality, but some people say that it's maybe a little too strong, should be diluted. So we'd have to look for more references about the use of that. But when I have looked it up before, it's a little bit controversial about how we should use that. And there's not too many people on the call, it's, 12. So if somebody wants to just unmute and ask a question in person too, that.
Oh, I think someone else.
Oh, was there another question?
Can you hear me? This is Wendy. Someone asked the question, can we plant pollinator plants in a large pot?
Oh, sure. I missed that one. Thank you. Yes, of course. You could plant, any plant that is, for the most part, plants that bloom, right, are going to attract pollinators. But what we find is that native plants attract more native pollinators. So there are some, most plants you can try in a pot. I don't do a lot of pot planting. So it might be just a little bit of trial and error, but anything that has nectar is going to attract some pollinators. But when I go to my ceanothus, it's covered with bumblebees at certain times of the year when it's in bloom. And once you learn about, go back and watch that lecture, because there's some really interesting little pollinators that you'll look at them more, and you'll also say, ooh, I don't want to spray that. Sometimes they're ugly bugs, and people think that all bugs are bad. We've kind of learned that lesson sometimes, right? Because they eat our leaves and, damage our plants. But if you look closely, you'll see little wings and you'll go, oh, wow. And you'll say, that's a native bee. I mean, some of them are really, really small, like 1/4 of an inch. So they're really fun to watch.
Yeah, that's a great talk. So we do have it on our YouTube channel, so feel free to check it out.
Okay, very good.
Yay.
Well, thank you all for your attention. It was fun talking to you.
Thank you so much for joining us. I think we all learned a lot.